Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah. This is experiment number 1, and the name of the experiment is field identification of soil sample. In this experiment, we can see there are a number of equipments. This is glass cylinder, spatula. This is beaker of 250 ml with water dropper. You can see the stopwatch here, and also we can find number of samples like clay, sand, soil, and these are soils for another experiment. Basically, in this experiment, we are going to describe 4 types of experiments like dry stand test, dilatancy or shaking test, plasticity test, dispersion test. First of all, we have to find the dry stand test. It provides a basis for describing the strength as very low, low, medium, high, or very high. A clay fragment can be broken with great effort, whereas a seal fragment crushes easily. The higher the clay content, the higher would be the dry strength. You can see the sample which was taken on the hand. This is not easily break, so we can term it as clay content. Now we are going to the next step, that is dilatancy or shaking test. It describes the permeability as rapid, slow, or none. The higher the silt content, the higher would be the permeability characteristics. So you can see whenever we are dropping the water, the permeability is very high, so we can denote it is as silt. Simultaneously, we are experimenting on soil or clay soil. In the clay soil, whenever we are dropping water, it turns to a paste. So the plasticity or the permeability is none to low or slow to none. In that case, we can denote it as clay content. You can see how we make the paste on our palm. We can find that the dilatancy is none to slow. So this is clay content. And after that, we are going to test about of plasticity. In this test, highly plastic clay can be rolled into a long thread with a diameter of approximately 1 by 8 inch just before the crumbly state is reached. Silt, on the other hand, can seldom be rolled into a thread. The record of plasticity test also indicates the toughness of the threads as it nears the crumbling stage. This condition is described as weak and friable, medium, or tough. The higher the clay content, the higher would be the toughness of the plastic thread at its crumbling stage. Now we are preparing the soil water paste to check the plasticity. This test is also termed as toughness of plastic thread test. Now we are making the thread, and it is approximately 3 millimeter or 1 by 8 inch in diameter. Whenever we are making the thread, we have to check the cracking on the surface. I repeat, if this is clay, if there is clay present on the sample, then the crumbly stage is reached. If the silt is present on the sample, uh, it cannot be rolled into a thread. You can see how can we make the thread of 3 millimeter or 1 by 8 inch. You can see there is a cracking on the surface, but the cracking is very minimal, so we can term it as the clay content. Now we are going to describe the dispersion test. In the dispersion test, it provides a rough estimate of a relative amount of sand, silt, and clay material in the soil mass. The coarser particles fall fast, and the finest one remains in the suspension for a long time. And we can count it down for 1 minute to 10 minutes. First of all, we have to pour all the soil sample into the beaker or the cylinder, glass cylinder, which is 1000 millimeter in a scale. After the pouring is completed, we have to wait for 1 minute to settle down all the particles. I repeat, the coarser particle falls fast and the finest one remains in the suspension. So we have to blend it very carefully. In that case, we have to wait for a time. In the meantime, we may discuss about the calculation part. In the calculation part, we have to give some comments like the test name, dry stent test, dilatancy or shaking test, plasticity test, and last of all the dispersion test. In the dry stent test, the reaction we found is very high. So the preliminary identification of the soil is fat clay and the soil type is clay. In the dilatancy or shaking test, The reaction is none to low. The preliminary identification of soil is fat clay, and we can denote that the soil type is clay. In the plasticity test, we can find the reaction is very high. So the preliminary identification of the soil is fat clay and the soil type is clay. In the dispersion test, we can find the sand is 2.5%, silt is 2.5%, clay is 95%. So the soil type is clay. This is the end of this test. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah.